Hello, welcome to Kubernetes SIG Cloud Provider for November 6th, 2024. We are governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so be kind and polite and respectful. Let's get into it. Let's take a quick look at what we have on our agenda, and I can share, and then I think we can talk through the one that probably the first one that we want to talk about is really in opposite order of how I have them in the agenda. So see, I can't share, so that is exciting. Do you want to try sharing, Mike? I
Yeah.
always love when I update something and then Zoom just gives me lots of sad exclamation points instead of the ability to
Yeah,
share.
it's weird, like, because my Zoom, there's another meeting that I am not able to share in. So like, it's really weird to see that problem come up again. But I am still able to share here, so it's cool.
Excellent. All right. So yeah, if we want to, since Walter is not here, maybe let's skip the failure for the release and jump to this CCM and LB discussion.
Yeah, okay. So this is this conversation is going to take a little bit of background to unpack, and then we can kind of get into the issues and everything. But at Red Hat, we were doing some work on the AWS CCM, and we were trying to answer a question for one of our customers about the way that this certain load balancer option could be expressed. And so we saw the service controller, everything, and we thought there was some changes that could be made in the service controller. And so we followed up with an issue here, and I want to apologize to begin with. Joel became ill today and wasn't able to make the meeting, so I'm going to kind of talk through his parts. But we had created this issue about supporting security groups for NLBs in the CCM. And during the discussion, what we learned is that the in-tree service controller in the CCM is not taking new features. And so the recommendation is that we should use the load balancer controller to support this functionality. And at that point, we had a little bit of a back and forth here about.
One sec, Elmiko, just at that point, what needs to be said here is the code that is here in this repository was the actual in-tree, which was in-tree in Kubernetes. So it's a copy of the code that was originally in Kubernetes that was brought here. So that's basically what he's talking about. The in-tree one is deprecated.
Well,
means the one that is there in Kubernetes is deprecated.
Correct. Yeah, this is the external one, but as you're saying, just to
Yeah.
clarify, it is the in-tree code that was copied to out of tree and then wrapped with the CCM, framework.
Yeah. And also, please note the date on this comment. It's October 2nd, 2023.
Yeah, no, the good point. We've been going back and forth on this, for like it had kind of died down and then it came up again for us and we brought it back up again. So like you're absolutely right. And the load balancer operator has existed for many years at this point. I mean, it's been in production, I think, for 2 or 3 years at this point. So the load balancer operator or controller is not something new. It has existed for a while. And you can see we're up to like 2.10 here. So it's been going for a while. And then, recently we reopened this issue because we became confused about, is it appropriate for us to be proposing changes in this repository? And I think, Joel had some specific questions about migrating from, if you're using the CCM and you deploy the load balancer operator, migrating to that. But I'd like to not get into those questions today because I think, that's kind of a different issue. So, we went back and forth here and had some conversations, just to clarify what was going on. But ultimately, what this means for us is, we need to look at the load balancer controller. We need to understand that. But the reason that I wanted to have a discussion here is because I think as a SIG, what we tell users is that, if you're going to be operating on a specific cloud, we advise using the Cloud Controller Manager if you're looking for integration with Node Lifecycle and services and whatnot. And so I think it would be natural for a user on AWS to say, okay, I'd like to get the AWS CCM now. And what I want to make sure is that we have a good way to inform users and developers about the linkages that might exist. Because if you look at the enhancements in Kubernetes, you might come away with the impression that all I need is the CCM, to get this functionality. And as a developer, I might think that as well. And I might think the CCM is where I should focus my attention, for proposing features. So I think it would be cool if the SIG could help to guide people to understand, it's like, yes, the CCM is one part of this, but on the cloud provider that you run on, in order to get the functionality you're looking for, there might be other controllers you need that are outside the CCM. And where this, to me, becomes a little bit of an overlap is, the load balancer operator obviously is doing something very specific, and it's accommodating a lot more features than the CCM is. But as a user, I would expect the CCM service operator or service controller to be the one that's doing all this. So how do I know as a user and as a developer, to make that connection from one to the next? And I think the SIG could be important in helping to guide people in this way. So that's kind of the context for the discussion here. I would love to hear people's input about it, though. I know Joel had some very specific questions about upgrading and those kind of things, but I don't want to try and take that on for him.
Yeah, I do want to ask Keith and Olivia if you remember any of the context around that time, just so before we set the stage of what exactly we need to do here, what guidance we can give to all the cloud provider implementations on how they should, provide information in their readmes or additional documentation around what are the list of controllers and what do they do, and are there anything new that's coming up, or alternatives that are there. Those are all things that we could be doing in everywhere, right? Not just
Right.
in this
Yeah.
repository, but across
Yeah.
there is some of the cloud providers are better than the others, but not everyone does exactly the same thing. But I do want to see if Kirtan or Olivia have any history here that they want to chime in about.
No, Dims. I have no context but I know it happened sometime last year, but yeah, I'm not aware of the context on the reasoning why.
Okay.
So as far as I know, this entry controller in the CCM, it provisions two kinds of load balancers. One is a classic load balancer, which I heard AWS is considering deprecating it. And the other one is network load balancer, which the AWS load balancer controller also provisioned. And I heard a decision for 2 to 3 years, we are considering deprecating the entry controller. So right now what we are doing is what is necessary. If there is some critical bug, we will fix that. And also if there is any security issue, we will try to patch it for entry controller. But as far as I heard from the PM, we do not support new features for the entry controller. That's why we encourage people to migrate to the AWS load balancer controller, because we are always implement new features in that controller. And Zach is from the ELB team, so we are collaborating with ELB team to support latest feature from ELB on the load balancer controller to make sure the NLB or ALB can have the latest feature from AWS. So so I don't think we will support new features on entry controller. And entry controller, it may have some issues, especially for performance. So that's why we are encouraging people to migrate to AWS load balancer controller.
So thanks, Olivia, for that context. Zach, thanks for coming here. So as follow-up, Elmiko and Brian, Kirtan, Olivia, and Zach, you can follow up with them around exactly what is the migration process and like which controllers need to be enabled and running in the environment and so on for your follow-up. But Olivia does bring up a point like, okay, we want to deprecate, how do we indicate to people that this is deprecated or will be deprecated, and like how long, right? Like we have strong processes in Kubernetes itself for the things that we do inside Kubernetes, but we don't have a strong set of guidance around like what happens in other repositories that are part of adjacent to Kubernetes.
So there's a number of things, or a couple of things that came up there that I want to focus on, and I think it's going to be. So first, I think we need to be accurate about our language, right? So like, I don't think it's appropriate to call this one the in-tree, the in-tree cloud provider anymore. I understand that it started as a migration of the in-tree code directly to out-of-tree, but at this point, in order to help users of Kubernetes, we should only be referring to the in-tree driver, or the in-tree controllers as the ones that actually existed in the Kubernetes code. So those are all out at this point. So this is the external CCM. This is the Cloud Controller Manager for AWS. And it doesn't just control load balancers. It also has the node lifecycle controller as well. So if I'm a user of Kubernetes and I want to understand what components I need to install for the best AWS experience possible, but this could be applicable to any cloud provider. I'm going to need to say, okay, I would like to run this CCM so that I can get the node lifecycling controller. And my expectation is the service controller would be installed as well. But in the case of AWS, I might need to also install the load balancer controller. So what I would expect, and this is probably something we'll need to do from a SIG level to start helping the different cloud providers have this, is like, this migration from in-tree right here, I think I would expect it to have a discussion of what I would need as a user. And if we're expressing the notion that in the future, the only updates this repository will get will be security related or perhaps related to the lifecycle controller. All feature development for services is happening in the load balancer controller. I think we should be building a bread trail that users can find their way there, basically.
I want to make sure that Walter gets a chance to weigh in here as well. Walter?
I mean, largely a +1 to what Elmiko said, but one thing I want to, we talk about in-tree, out-of-tree, but I think, one thing I want to say, everything there was right, but just because it's out of tree doesn't mean it isn't open source, right? And I want to point out that this is Kubernetes / cloud provider AWS. And I mentioned this because I heard conversations about PMs, and I understand PMs with engineering teams can help designate where resources get spent, but this is not, cloud provider GCP is owned by CNCF. Cloud provider Azure is owned by CNCF. Cloud provider AWS is owned by CNCF, and they're actually managed by this SIG. And I just want to point out that, when push comes to shove, this SIG decides what's going on here. This is an open source project. This is not an Amazon project. And I think it is worth, just being clear on that just because we say this is out of tree does not mean that this is out of CNCF or out of open source.
Absolutely. I think Olivia was talking about like the effort that the designated team is supposed to be working on. So
100%. And that's the way I took it. Mm-hmm. But I figured it was still worth reiterating that, it is worth understanding who actually owns this, which is
absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the main points that I was making to the team is like, if people come up with PRs, then we have to evaluate just like we evaluate anything else. and the owners in the owner's file will be the ones approving and reviewing the stuff. So there is no discussion there around like, do we allow something or not allow something. It's up to the normal processes that we follow.
So thank you, Walter. Like, yeah, that was pretty kind of where one of the areas I was driving towards. And I think for me, this adds into the difficulties then of like, how do open source developers from all different places come to work on this code? Because my expectation reading the enhancements and looking at Kubernetes is that if I thought I had a feature that was related to services and load balancers, the first place I would go to look would be the CCM. And so I would expect that if this cloud controller manager is not the appropriate place for service-based changes, and we're telling users that, yes, you need this cloud controller manager, but you also need the load balancer operator or controller if you want to truly have support for all the services. I think we need to make that more concrete. And I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I think we need to make it clear to users where these things happen, because to the notion of the engineering efforts that are expended outside of this meeting, any developer might look at this and say, oh, I've got this great feature idea I want to add to the service controller in this cloud controller manager. And if you spend time to develop it and do all the stuff, and then only to be told like, well, we're not taking any features here.
So let me ask you this, Elmiko. Like, do we also have to point out to the fact that you need a CNI, which is outside, and a CSI, which is outside? Because CSI was entry at one point in time, but now we take it for granted. It's the same story with the load balancer. There's lots of load balancer controllers out there. This is certainly not the only one that is out there. So it's like,
yeah, absolutely.
What is the problem here, right? Like, yes, the README has to be better, but it's not contentious. It's just a PR. Anybody can put against the repository to say, hey, the language is wrong, and here is some additional information, right?
Right.
So,
no, exactly.
And the other point I also want to make is like, this is the reason I brought the discussion here to the SIG rather than just between AWS and Red Hat, right? So we get out of that mode where we are talking between companies and say, hey, we have to do this in the community, and we have to do this the right way in the community, and that's why we are here talking about it.
No, and Walter, if you don't mind me just responding real quick, like, no, like Dims, yeah, I appreciate bringing the conversation here. When you suggested that, I was like, yeah, that's a great idea, because I think, this is a bigger issue than I was kind of thinking about originally. And so to your notion of the CSI and CNI stuff, and I have to profess, I'm not as knowledgeable about those as I am about the CCM topic. So please excuse me if I say things that aren't quite correct, but I think that, there is guidance in the Kubernetes documentation about, you should use a CNI if you need this networking, you should use the CSI if you need storage. And similarly, the cloud controller managers are referenced in the Kubernetes docs, and they specifically mention like, the node, the service, and the route controllers. So I think like, for me, what's different here is that we advertise one specific type of functionality, and then as a developer, I look at the code component that's theoretically owns that. And I'm being told by the maintainers then that like, no, we're not taking any features, for this specific controller here. So like, I think we just need to be better about, broadcasting these things. I don't think there's actually a problem here per se. I think if there's any problem, yeah, you're right. We need to do better documentation.
So I will actually say, I think not doing better at documentation is a problem. I will also say, I don't, when I say this, I'm not trying to throw the docs team under the bus, when SIG docs under the bus when I say this. I will say that, when we started on this project, SIG Cloud Provider and SIG Storage with the CCM and the CSI worked very closely together. In fact, trying to coordinate all of these changes and get them kind of going in, a single repo. I'm less sure on open source, but I know on the GCP side that, the cloud provider GCP, a large number of the people maintaining cloud provider GCP are in fact the load balancing team at Google. So, I mean, there are definitely places where these various teams have coordinated, and yet we have, as many of us who are developers have this bad habit of getting like the code working and being like, all right, I'm done, peace out. And, I think this is where we see a lot of these problems. Like, there needs to be ongoing ownership, and ongoing ownership includes things like allowing the customers of each of these cloud specific implementations of Kubernetes to actually understand what the pieces are, so that they can, make sure the right things, like, do they have the right storage plugins loaded? If they're having a problem, do they have the right CCM running? Do they have the right load balancer running? What should they be expecting? Like, if they look at the pods running, are those, it's like, I didn't run that workload. Where's it coming from? Like, these are all things that I actually do think that are things we should be working, each of those teams should be working together and working with the SIG docs team to make better, and probably make standardized, right? And this is one of those, like, if you look at our early SIG Cloud Provider docs and our early bugs, we have what bugs they're saying, come up with a standard form for the different cloud providers so that there's a consistent look and we have a consistent way to link in, and no traction on any of them. So maybe this is the time for some of that to happen.
Yeah, great point. And I think, like, to Dim's what you were saying before, and I, now that I think about this a little more too, it's like I'm doing some work in investigating, making some modular, like proposing an idea for modular CCM testing, like improving the CCM tests that we have in core Kubernetes. And so outside of the AWS specific features, because I can't imagine those would be in like any sort of common test. What my concern would be is, like, if someone implemented a CCM, and I'm definitely not saying that AWS did this, because I think you've been good about what you're doing here. It was confusing for me to see it. If someone made a CCM and said, well, we're going to take all the service controller out of our CCM and put it in another operator that we have, and then we go to like test it or something like that, and now it's like, okay, well, in addition to the CCM, you need this other thing too or something. I would just want to make sure that the developers know, like, what is the dependency chain here? Like, if I'm looking for specific behavior, like what do I need to get
I'm
to?
thoroughly with you there. We got to do a better documentation for people who are coming in. So far, it's been very informal, in the sense that we work closely with the COPS team, and the COPS team is approvers on this repository. A bunch of folks from the COPS team. We actually use code from this repository and COPS to do the EC2 based scalability tests and whatnot as well. So and like all the changes that are going in here in this repository are kind of vetted by the COPS team, because they see it first, right? Like, we make a mistake here and they yell at us, right? So things have been happening informally. It's just that we didn't get any solid set of people who are engaged on an ongoing basis. And if Red Hat wants to come to the table, I would love for Red Hat to like play that role of keeping us honest. And like we were hoping for, at one point, I think we were hoping for Suze and other folks like Gardner and other folks also to show up as well on an ongoing basis. And that hasn't happened. So if Red Hat wants to come to the table and maintain this repository with us and like do the things that needs to be done, very happy to do that. It's just that we need engagement here, not just from the folks that are already on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's like what I'm trying to understand now, and what I'm learning, because I think we would like to be good partners in the upstream here. We would like to help out where we can. I think what made us a little shy is that a year ago when we started looking into this, we kind of tripped over this, and we're like, okay, well, what do we do now? And so understanding the boundaries of like where, that's really the tough part, is right. Like as an open source developer, I come to your project, I study it, or I come to the project and I study it, and then I say, I got this great idea for a feature, and I propose it, and it's like, oh, you're in the wrong place or whatever. And it's like, oh, how did I do that? So understanding the boundaries, and maybe if that's where Red Hat can help here, is to propose some
Absolutely.
changes to help define those boundaries. Like I'm all for it,
I mean, we did the escalation part right this time. It wasn't done correctly last time, right? Like, when
Absolutely,
the thing was closed, there was no escalation, and like
right.
we didn't talk about it on Slack or mailing list or anywhere else, right? Like, so people just took it for granted. And when you guys came to the table this year, we did the right thing by talking about it internally and here on this forum, and like having all sorts of coordination efforts happening. So that's the right thing to do, right? And that's what we are looking for too.
Yeah, absolutely agree. So yeah, like I said, I don't think there's any problem here. There's no like change I'm trying to force or push or anything like that. I wanted to explore the issue, and I think it sounds like maybe we need to think about this a little more. And some of the points Walter was making, maybe there's a way we can provide more guidance from the SIG level, and as a Red Hatter, I can get involved, maybe pushing some PRs to help with the documentation. But maybe there's a way from the SIG level that we could help organize an effort for, for cloud providers who need to tell their users that there are other things you should look at as well. Like maybe we can provide some structured way that they could do that, and that would make it better for everybody. That's my hope, at least.
Right. I mean, the simplest thing is like, here is how you document the list of controllers that you have, right? And here is how you configure those controllers, right? If we come up with like a standard format for that, and then we can go around all the repositories and say, hey, document this stuff, right? And if there's an alternative which is not there in your repositories, throw a link to the external documentation, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, maybe like some sort of like health checklist we can come up with and say like, have you put all these things in your README or something?
And the thing there that is critical is like the same information is there in all the repositories, right? So people can go and compare to say, hey, I see this in Azure, but I don't see this in AWS. I see it in GCP. Like, they can do the comparison between the various cloud provider repositories, so they get the same kind of information. And if something is missing in one, then we go around updating in all the repositories. So that's like initiative from the SIG level.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe there's a way we can come up with a template for like a contributing doc or some extra doc that lives in there. That, yeah, I think that would probably help people a lot if they could see that and understand those things.
Sometimes even the relationship between Bridget. Sometimes even the relationship between like these repositories and what is already in KK, right? The handshake is loosey goosey, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Right. Totally.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know? Right.
Right. We had long conversations around like the node and like the node information and the CCM adding node information and all that as well, right? The IP addresses and the names of the nodes and things like that. We've had long conversations about it recently. And we don't have a place for that even now, right? Like it is still on PRs and issues.
Yeah, I wanted to come in real quick and say that I think it's really important to capture the stuff that Dims is talking about. And I also think that even if we have a standard template, which is a great idea, obviously it can't be enforced on any and all, external providers by the very virtue of being external. But certainly there's testing that, and Miko can talk more about the consistency testing that we want from a technical level. So perhaps we can extend some of that to docs. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, no, that's probably a great way to kind of tie these things together. I think even just like proposing an enhancement for like the CCM stuff about how, users kind of find the template and then like what, what can they do with it? And, certainly going back to what Walter said, for all the cloud providers that exist under the Kubernetes SIGs, organization, we as a SIG or SIG members, we can propose the PRs to update things there and see how those go. But yeah, no, I think that might be a nice next step, is maybe coming up with like some sort of draft enhancement or something to propose a way so that we could document these kind of linkages between the different controllers and everything.
If we get enough momentum, right? Like if we have hands on deck, then we can even go further to do some, CSI has a test suite, Node has a test suite. Why can't we have one, right? So that then
that's what I want to propose.
Right. Then we'll have folks like, hey, yeah, we have an external one in our own repository and we run these tests, and so you should be good, right? So they can do self-certification or whatever.
Right. And then that gives us the real contract, right? Because then we can say we have standard tests in KK that everyone has agreed on are like the CCM tests, right? And yeah, like if your CCM passes that, then you've done it correctly. Like you've satisfied whatever that is. And if there are extra things, features that the test doesn't get into because they're, provider specific, then that's where you document. That doesn't belong in the test, right? So I think that would be perfectly acceptable to me.
Right. It's just that we've never had enough hands on deck. Walter can attest to it.
And like I know CCM is like the last thing you think about, right?
Yeah.
All right. So Dims, you gotta admit it. Did Elmika put you up to this as like a low-key advertisement for our cloud provider talk at KubeCon that's all about testing? Because it kind of sounds like this is the perfect setup for exactly what we want.
I wish I was coming, Bridget. I'm not.
Oh. It's just so funny because like great minds. You're thinking exactly along the same lines as the draft proposal that Elmiko has. I could put a link
Right.
to that.
It's very sparse at the moment, so maybe.
Yeah, I can persuade Kirsten to take a look at it too with me. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And as I get more content there, I definitely want to share. I've got it in like pre-draft mode where I'm working on it on HackMD before proposing it as a PR because I need to get some more text there. But I mean, you basically summed it up perfectly. Like if you look at the CSI tests that we have in KK now, it's like they're common for all the CSIs, and they just have a config that lives, that describes what does the AWS CSI need to configure? What does the Azure CSI need to configure? And I think it's really elegant how they've made that solution. So I would love to see something like that for CCMs too. So I think like I've gotten really a lot of what I needed out of this conversation. Thank you, Dims and Olivia and Kirsten for coming. And Brian, thank you for showing up too. Thankfully, we didn't need you to dive into the pool and start saving people.
Thanks, Brad. Nice to meet you. It's been a long time since I saw you from ASF.
I understand. I was happy to help, and I'm glad you guys got this all kind of squared away. It's good to see cooperation happening in the broader community.
Okay, folks, I got to drop. I have a little bit of an emergency. Is that okay?
Yep. Thanks, Dims. Like I
Of
said, I think I'm
course.
good here. Thank you.
Take care.
I'm also going to drop, so take care.
All right.
Brad.
Wonderful. Walter, before you wave goodbye, you did have one thing I wanted to ask you about. I'm sure you probably saw it in the doc.
Sorry, I've been slammed right now. What's up?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I did. I had added an item that was basically, oh, good. It looks like Antonio was starting to take a look at this, but we probably want it on Walter's radar, which is basically it looks like there's possibly a Google related test that's release blocking, like a test failure.
Right.
So you might want to take a look at that. And Antonio appears to be on it, so it might be fine. But since you are here, I figured I'd highlight it for you because none of us ever want to be the release blocker.
True enough. All right. Yeah. You don't happen to have it
Yes, I
handy,
have
do
it.
you?
I do have it handy. If you click on the Google Doc that I just put in the chat, and just scroll down to the agenda where it says Bridget Crum had a discussion on Slack about a release blocking failure. And that has the full context from Slack, and it also has the link from Antonio, where it looks like he is responding that it might be the right thing. Do you want to click on that, Almiko, since you're sharing?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry, just to kind of show what we're all looking at the same thing. So we have, yeah, so this like discussion of possible release blocking issue, and then this issue from Antonio. I would be remiss if I didn't tell Walter about it since he is here. He probably cares.
Cause. All right. That's
I think
probably a node issue. I will reach out to the node team
I mean,
and
take a
make
look,
sure.
scroll down, see what Antonio is up to. Maybe it's already fine, maybe it's fixed. It looks like Antonio is saying something about detected, but I don't want to assume that that means fixed. You know what I'm saying? It's like, is that, does that require the team you're talking about to come look at it? Clearly, this has not been merged. So, like, anyway, there's obviously something going on here that is probably relevant to your interests.
Yeah. Hang on. 128 607.
And I also
All
know,
right.
of course, Antonio being in the time zone he's in means that maybe you want somebody in your time zone to pick up this baton because I'm looking at the clock, TikTok. Friday's coming soon. Help.
Well, when the last time I talked to the node team, I may be associating unrelated things, but the SIG nodes, some of the folks on SIG node had mentioned they were having some cause problems. So I'm just going to start by seeing make sure the two groups have talked to each other and that.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, definitely Antonio's got something.
Yeah, and he's definitely digging into something, but I just want to make sure you don't miss hearing about this and then say, why did you not tell me? I was in a meeting with you and now the release is blocked on me. I'm like, I'll just tell him. And that way.
Actually, can you, from Antonio, he says already detected.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know what that means. There's
But there's a link. I was going to suggest we follow it.
Yeah, that's this. And so it's like, this is somebody trying to fix something in the E2E tests. But then there was a lot of discussion in that. And I thought, is that a fix? I don't know if that's a fix.
So this is a pull request, and it looks like it's not landed yet, but is
right. But notice if you scroll down on that pull request that there's a bunch of bike shedding in it. So that's why I was like, I don't know if this is really.
Well,
I don't know.
I can
Yeah.
ping Tim because interestingly, Tim is one of the folks on the node team I was mentioning. So, all right,
yeah.
I can.
So yeah, as you can see, there's a bunch of back and forth there. But I was like, oh, I hope this isn't gonna.
Oh yeah, 50 sounds like related to. Can we go down a little bit further?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll follow up. Thank you. This is going to take a little bit of digging, but.
Oh, of course. I don't expect you to have an answer right now. This was just me telling you, hey, just so you're aware, there is a thing.
I appreciate that. And it looks like there are people actively looking at this right now, but all right.
Yep. Awesome. All right. That's what I got. Anybody else have anything before we see some of you next week? We're going to see you there, Walter? Here then?
No, sadly, I didn't get to go to QCon this year, but I'm hoping next.
Yeah, same thing. I wouldn't be.
Well, hopefully next time. All
Yeah.
right. All right. Anybody have anything else we should talk about? Almiko?
I was just going to see,
Right.
should we just look at the open triage issues?
That's where I got that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The other one was like, more minor, but this one was like, oh, this is release blocking, basically.
Yep. Yeah, nothing for me then. Thanks.
All right.
Got it. All right.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.